This is your Friday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Kind of a special edition today. Going to spend the whole episode talking to Paul Klauda, Star Tribune high school sports editor, at least for the next few weeks. He is transitioning to a new role at the Star Tribune as nation and world editor. I thought it'd be fun to have him on, though, since he followed me in that job. He's had that job as a high school sports editor for the past decade. I had that job for about 5 years before him. And so just kind of a good discussion of high school sports, about the challenges of covering high school sports in the pandemic, and all sorts of good stuff around that. So I hope you enjoy this interview with Paul Klauda. Special guest on Daily Delivery today, Paul Klauda, who has been our high school sports editor at the Star Tribune for the past decade. As the job that I had for about 5 years, I was the high school sports editor from like 2007 to 2011, somewhere in there. So we have a shared history, but Paul is moving on to a different job at the Star Tribune as the Nation and World editor, and just thought it'd be fun to have him on to talk about a couple different things. So, Paul, how are you doing today?
Good, Mike. Good, Mike. Boy, you make it sound so long ago that you were the high school sports editor.
Well, I feel like I was a young man when I took over that job, and then it aged me. No, I think I was 30 when I took over that job, and it was, as you probably figured out, it's a really interesting and unique job, but it also, there's a lot to do in that job. And especially, as I grew into that job, I think we added a lot of online components. We were starting to do a lot with stats. We added the high school hubs, which you have become very much acquainted with and taken to another level since you've been in that job. But it's a job that there's a ton of rewards in terms of the access, in terms of the people you get to cover, in terms of how happy people are to have the coverage. But when you're covering how many countless schools in Minnesota, even in the metro area, it's kind of a lot to get your arms around, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. And I remember being quite impressed when I moved into sports, because I had spent my career up to that point, working in the news side of the newsroom. But I remember thinking, I watched how you worked, and you're right, there's an incredible amount of coordinating and planning, and just sort of, on big game nights like Friday night, it's crazy in terms of the amount of activity we're trying to cover. But I remember watching, and I thought, not only is this guy Rand coordinating all this stuff, but he's somehow reporting on stories at the same time. And I thought, how in the heck does he do that? Because I never could figure out, and only until recently have I been able to do any real writing as part of this job. But I thought, this guy's incredible. He does this full-time job, and he's a reporter on top of it. You really set a high standard, I thought, for how you do the work.
The energy of youth, Paul. And no, I didn't have any kids back then, so I was probably worked too much sometimes. But what I've been impressed by with you is just you've taken the organization to another level, and just being able to promote and get all these kind of zero in on the coverage that really matters, and really dive into some topics that that have really been big issues in high school sports in recent years. Kind of bringing that news experience that you have to the job has really taken preps to another level. So kudos to that. I want to ask you some other preps coverage related stuff, kind of favorite memories, challenges, things like that. But at first I do want to get into a little bit of, we've got one of the bigger projects that you have taken on in recent years is the All Metro Sports Awards, and that we're coming up on that again early next week. I believe Monday begins the first digital component of that. And maybe give the listener a refresher on what the All Metro Sports Awards, or AMSA as we call them around the building. What are those, and when did we start those, and what's the goal of those?
Sure. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, the All Metro Sports Awards, I believe this is our fourth year of giving these awards out. When we started them, the idea was to take a concept that you were familiar with, and I think it probably even preceded your time working in high school sports, but we have typically named a All Metro Player of the Year in some of the more popular, sports that we cover: football, volleyball, soccer, basketball, hockey, baseball, softball, lacrosse. I think are the ones we focused on initially. We wanted to expand that concept and recognize top athletes at all high school sports. So we did that, and at the same time, we added 10 awards that we wanted to give out at the end of the year that would be part of our All Metro Sports Awards banquet outing is what we envisioned. And for the first 2 years, let's see, that would be 2018 and 19. Yeah, we did hold an event where we invited all of the winners of all of those awards, as well as all of the first team recognized athletes in sports like football, volleyball, basketball, hockey, etc. So we had, I want to say, plus parents and friends, and we probably had 500 people at Target Field that first year. We did a second one at US Bank Stadium in 2019. We had plans in 2020, I think, to do it at Allianz Field. And then, of course, the pandemic changed everything. And we shifted to a virtual format, which we did last year, and we're going to do again starting on Monday. So what we're going to do is each day, starting Monday the 12th, we're going to recognize and announce a couple of these 10 winners of these All Metro Sports Awards, and present them on our website with a digital unveiling middle of the day, and then we'll publish that information in the next day's newspaper. So for the 5 days of next week, we'll have, in a sense, a virtual banquet where we can't have people come together. We weren't able to work out the logistics of that for this year, even though it feels like things have opened up a bit more. But we're going to do it virtually again this year, and hopefully next year, when my successor is in place, we'll be back doing it out at a cool venue, because it was a lot of fun. It was a great way to recognize top athletes and celebrate a little bit the marvel and the coolness that is high school sports in Minnesota.
Absolutely. I was at both of the in-person ones, the Target Field one in 2018, which was, the first one we did, and you had a huge hand in organizing that, and I'm sure you really had no idea how that would turn out, what the response would be, but it sure seemed like especially the athletes, the kids themselves, were having a lot of fun at that, and just getting a chance to mingle a little bit, meet people that from all around the metro that I'm sure a lot of the top athletes in the same sports, know each other pretty well just from competing against each other in high school or even club sports, things like that. But just bringing them all together was a great idea. But I do have to ask, was event planner really in your job description when you started? Because I don't believe it was in my job description when I was the high school sports editor.
Yeah, I missed that class in college. That's for sure. But there's a lot of help. Our marketing department does a great job of supporting this. Chris Carr, the sports editor, and the people that I work with on my team, Jim Paulson, David LeVake, Ron Hagstrom, and many others, frankly, who make this a pretty cool event. So yeah, but event planner, that doesn't feel like day-to-day journalism work, does it?
No, it doesn't. But you're right. I mean, the one at Target Field and then the one at US Bank Stadium was a success as well. Remind me too, the categories are, you got like athlete of the year, coach of the year, play of the year, things like that. Is that still kind of the standard categories?
Yeah, I'll use that to kind of walk through, if I could, just the schedule of unveiling for next week. So on Monday, we will be recognizing the play of the year. We pick one play out of the 3 seasons and call it out as the play of the year. And we'll have coverage of that. We also recognize someone who we think represents courage in competition. So we have a courage in competition award that we will be giving out on Monday. That typically acknowledges someone who went above and beyond and dealt with some other circumstances in their life to kind of show what courage in competition is all about. And we'll also on Monday kind of remind people who our fall Metro Players of the Year were. So the big unveils play of the year and our courage in competition award on Monday. Tuesday, We step back and recognize the boys team coach of the year and a girls team coach of the year. Coaches who led their teams to recognition, success, overcoming challenges, that sort of thing. A little teaser here. I think you'll see one of those awards might be a little bit of a surprise to people in terms of kind of what we did and who we recognized. We'll also have our winter sports Metro Players of the Year who will get some recognition that day. On Wednesday, excuse me, we kind of shift gears and we recognize what we call our Student First Award. You might be able to guess what that means. It's someone who academically also excels in a way that goes above and beyond. We'll also be recognizing, we have what we call team champions in sports that are primarily team-based, and the two that we'll be talking about on Wednesday, one is dance team, and the other is synchronized swimming. So we'll be recognizing champions in those two sports and activities, along with our spring sports Metro Players of the Year, who will get some recognition. Thursday, we go and recognize three different awards. One, our Boys Athlete of the Year, again, across all winter, fall, and spring sports, who our top boys athlete would be. And we do the same for our top girls athlete, again, across all three seasons, all of the sports. And we also recognize what we call our difference maker, someone who, in a different way than academics or necessarily personal overcoming a personal situation in terms of a courageous performance. This is someone who's tried to make a difference on and off the field or court or ice or whatever it may be. So that's a pretty cool day. And then on Friday, we save for the last day, we recognize. Again, there's been a lot of great teams playing in this wacky 2020-2021 school year, but we try to step back and pick one boys team and one girls team to call out as the teams of the year for boys sports and a team of the year for girls sports. So we'll be doing that online on Friday. And then that'll be a wrap for AMSA for 2021. And again, we hope we'll be doing all this in person next year.
Sounds like a great lineup, and I gotta ask, it'll almost kind of be a wrap for you too. I want to get to, a little bit of your new role, but I do have to ask you first. I mean, we've all been doing it, in various ways for the last, year to year and a half. But what were the particular challenges of preps coverage during this COVID time? Even like you say, we're starting to come out of it a little bit. There's been some attendance and things like that. We're starting to see full capacity at a lot of our pro events now. But really from the tournament season of 2020 through not that long ago, it was a lot of different rules you're adapting to, different restrictions, things like that. What were how did you and the preps team, a lot of those guys I know very well because I worked with them too, how did you guys adapt and still continue to provide the coverage that people wanted of a lot of these events as they were starting to be able to happen again?
Yeah, what an unknown. I mean, one thing I've noticed in sports and high school sports especially is that there's a rhythm and an organization to how you do the work, because you're covering games, you're covering postseasons that lead to tournaments. So you kind of get used to how to do that in a kind of a core way of how to execute coverage of games, how to ramp up for postseason, how to, bring it to a head at the state tournament, despite all the craziness that goes on. But suddenly none of that was in play. And it was like a totally different unknown in front of us. I remember when things shut down back in, March of 2020. I want to say it was on a Friday. The girls basketball state tournament was, kind of getting down to the finals and semis, and suddenly, they just shut it down. They weren't going to play. And I remember having a conversation with Jim Paulson and David LeVake, who are the two reporters who end up covering most of the games for us, and saying, guys, this is going to be one of those times when you're going to remember this period for the rest of your life. And I didn't really know what I was saying. It wasn't like I kind of had it all figured out, but I thought, this just doesn't happen. You slam the brakes on everything. And So as we spent the spring, again, we were working within, the next day we were all remote and rarely, if ever, seeing each other in person. In fact, I don't know that I've seen those guys except on Zoom calls and Teams meetings in person in a face-to-face way yet. So we're doing it remote. The spring was weird because there was no sports. The high school league, to its credit, was trying to figure out how to manage this because suddenly they didn't have these tournaments that generated a large part of what they do. But as we came into the fall, the high school league approved getting going with sports, and that at least gave us that sense of, okay, now we can at least try to cover some of these activities. But they put football and volleyball on hold. So here comes September without kind of your core or two of your core sports in front of you. But we went out and covered some sports that we could cover. Frankly, even that was a little weird because the schools were trying to figure out how to manage the attendance rules and the media rules. And we didn't know if we could, how close, if at all, we could get to athletes to talk to them after games and get to coaches. We sort of just worked it out on the fly, and it's a credit to the schools, the athletic directors, the coaches, the athletes, for making it possible for us to do our jobs reasonably well, I thought, through the fall. And then when they brought football and volleyball back, we kind of tried to step up and sort of do our traditional Friday night football coverage again. But even that was odd because we didn't know, what kind of access we were going to get, and could we work with, if we couldn't sit in a press box, for example, could you work on a cold night, without your computer dying? Not, we take a few notes by hand, but a lot of what we do is done on the computer, recording interviews on your phone, so suddenly the weather becomes a bit more of a factor in terms of covering those late fall, early, November-ish sports. But then, we slammed back into another shutdown with the pandemic in mid-November brought the football and volleyball to a halt early. It delayed the start of the winter sports. We figured they would get going at some point, and they did in early January. But even that was weird because you're spending that last part of 2020 in this period of uncertainty. But as winter sports got going, at least we had a little bit of a template for how to cover games then based on how it worked in the fall. But suddenly we were, we had to be indoors for basketball and for hockey. So that was, another set of unknowns. If you had to be inside, how could you cover a game and sit and do your interviews and get your work done in that environment? And I thought we did a great job. And again, credit to the schools which were figuring this stuff out along, kind of in live mode, just as we were. The state tournaments came back in the winter season, and that was nice. That was a bit of a challenge just because I think with the high school league, acknowledging that there would be bigger, more media coverage in those events, that they had to figure out how to do that in a way that, adhered to social distancing guidelines and the rules that the state had put in place for access. So we covered, frankly, Mike, we covered a lot of state tournament games from our living rooms and our, homes, watching them on live stream, and then working sources to get a hold of people after the games because we couldn't talk to people after games on site at, for example, at Target Center or at Excel. So I remember David LeVake and Lauren Nelson at the hockey tournament. They actually rented a hotel room in a hotel where there were other teams that were staying, and that proved to be kind of a nice win because they could find kids outside on the sidewalk or waiting for the bus and that sort of thing. So just the kind of the coincidence of that helped our hockey coverage. I thought, who would have thought that we would be doing that? And of course, the kids started the winter season in masks, wearing masks, and that turned into a bit of a controversy and a bit of a story that we covered. But by the time we got to spring, it felt like, the masks were still around, but they largely, maybe I can't remember exactly when Waltz didn't make masking required for sports. It felt like we ended the year in the most normal of ways that we could have. It still was a little bit different, but we had state tournaments, we had kids competing without masks, we had, still some limitations on how we could cover games, but for the most part, it felt like we kind of got to the end of the year thinking this is pretty close to normal. And doesn't it feel good?
Yeah,
It was nice.
you guys did a great job adapting all year, kind of like a lot of what we say about this time, like, do everything we can to get through it, do the best we can, and let's hope we never have to do everything we've done again, unlearn everything we lost, unlearn everything we learned in the last 16 months in a certain extent, because we don't want to have to open up that playbook on any event again. And, the one thing I should mention too is, in addition to covering the games, you're covering the news of how all this impacts the games, which is a whole nother set of stories to write and things to keep track of. What's starting up again, how is this impacting sports, how is this impacting lives, things like that. And there was a lot of good stories to tell on that note along the way, I would imagine.
Yes, and we found again the metrics of how we kind of keep track of what people are reading online is it's a little bit imprecise, but we certainly discovered that there was incredible interest in high school sports coverage as it related to when are sports going to start up again, what sports are going to start up, and then under what conditions are they going to start up. And certainly, I'm sure some of that interest was spawned by just the societal debate about where we should be when it comes to using masks. And so some of the interest in the coverage was, I'm sure, brought about by just the topics of what we were writing about. But there was a lot of news to cover. The high school league itself, it went through a fair amount of financial, upheaval in terms of, suddenly not having state tournaments to help fund its budget. It actually created a budget for this last school year that didn't assume any state tournaments would be happening. So suddenly an organization that was typically bringing in, revenues of $9 million a year was budgeting to be about a $5 million organization. But then they brought some of the state tournaments back. And how they pulled that off was a story. And and just covering how many people could be in attendance at games, what sports are going to be played, the masking at practices and games, and all of that. People really seemed very, very interested in it, and frankly, it was rewarding in a way to be able to provide that information to people and try to do it in a way that fairly and accurately reported what was going on at a time when we were all trying to sort of figure out this unknown of the pandemic and how to make sense of how it affected so many things in high school sports especially.
Well, yeah, and you make a good point. I'm sure some of the interest in those stories was, you're right, the kind of dividedness we have, maybe kind of the political nature of how this has become. But some of it too is just the intense interest in, especially from families who are impacted by high school sports. When you become involved in the coverage of high school sports, we both have been high school editors, spanning the last 15 years at the paper. You for 10, me for 5. I still can't believe you did twice as long as I did. I would not have imagined that was how long it ended up being, but it did. But, just you realize how much high school sports mean to so many people, just in terms of the fabric of their lives, the ability to compete, the ability for parents to see their kids compete at high levels. It really does drive that home. And that's probably one of the more rewarding, but also, intense parts of high school sports coverage, is just how much people care about them.
Yeah. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that, the events of May 2020, the death of George Floyd, also rippled through the sports world in a significant way. And I think in the high school sports world as well. And that also became, something that we were dealing with in our community, and it permeated and affected, I think, just the way we thought about sports in that environment. And we tried to cover that as well. Again, we weren't trying, and we talked about this a lot, and we wanted to, there was a kind of an itch to kind of just get back to covering the games. Let's get back to covering what we're really all about, which is high school sports. And that's obviously what we wanted to do. But we also had to be mindful of how the events in our community were affecting things as well. And we tried to be, thoughtful about how we did that, and not, sort of bring it up all the time, but when it mattered, or when it when a guy like Charles Adams, the Minneapolis North football coach, who at the time was still a Minneapolis police officer working as a liaison at Minneapolis North High School, a guy like him trying to navigate what he was going through, and also, especially how he was trying to be a coach and a mentor to his athletes and those who look up to him at his school, and I think even athletes at other schools. That's part of the story too. And we Jim Paulson did a wonderful story about Adams last summer that I'm really proud of being part of the publishing of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, you're right. That piece of it we should not overlook. Those were the two, dominant stories, two dominant societal stories in the last year and a half. And they certainly touched a lot of pieces of sports, and preps was a big part of that. Paul, I almost feel like it's a shame almost that you don't get a normal year as a send off, and maybe it's almost like a clean break. You get to go do something else now, be the Nation World editor. You've worn a lot of different hats at the Star Tribune, even before taking on this preps role. Maybe kind of as a final question for you, kind of what are you most looking forward to as you move on to this next role, and what do you think you'll either miss or imagine that you'll miss once you're a little bit more removed from preps after doing this job for a decade?
Yeah, well, what I'm looking forward to, frankly, is just the ability to do something that's a little bit different. You mentioned doing 10 years on this job, which I've loved, and I wouldn't leave it if I didn't have at least just a little bit of an itch of, in my 40 years at the paper, thinking, is there anything else I could do that would be fun and interesting and challenging in the way coming to sports 10 years ago was. I looked at that as a challenge and also something that would be fun. So that's what I'm looking forward to, if you could say the most, is just the chance to do something a little bit different as a career challenge. But that also speaks to what I'm going to miss about sports and working 10 years with a crew that's been pretty solid and pretty shouldn't say solid. It's been, many of the same people that I've worked with from the get-go. To work that long with really, really, really good people who do, great work and just make our coverage, I think, the best in the state by a long shot. To walk away from that is going to be, sad, and I'm going to miss that. Not just the guys that I work with as reporters, but the editors and the copy editors, the entire environment in sports, which, if I'm sure many of your listeners are sports fans, and so they get this. But so much of what happens in sports happens fast, and it happens often at night, and in a newspaper environment that creates pressure with deadlines. And I've been amazed from the first day I got to sports at how well and how fast the people in sports work on deadline to produce what is, I think, an amazing amount of work in a very, very short period of time, to the benefit of our digital audience as well as our print audience. And nobody works faster and harder, in those last few minutes, hours before deadline than the sports department. And to walk away from that is going to be sort of walking away from a pretty cool part of the operation.
Absolutely. There's a great kind of energy that does happen. I missed that when I left that role as well. Obviously, I'm still in sports and get to feel some of that, but there's nothing quite like the, preps games. You never quite know when they're going to end. You never quite know what's going to happen. There's an unpredictability to that, in the greater sports world, but particularly preps that definitely is a big piece of the fun and also the stress, but the good kind of stress of that job. And you did a great job with it for so long. I'm happy for you to get to have a new opportunity. Hopefully get to go on a few more bike rides at normal hours now as you get on with the summer. But thanks for joining Daily Delivery today, Paul Klauda, and best of luck as you transition to this new role at the end of the month.
Thank you very much, Michael. I've enjoyed it.
That'll do it for today. Next week, kind of a special week as well. 1991 was a special time in Minnesota sports, kind of kicked off a run of 8, 9, 10 months of amazing events here. Had the Stanley Cup Finals, had the U.S. Open golf, had the World Series, the Super Bowl, and the Final Four all all in a 1-year span starting in May of 1991. So I'll have 5 shows on that next week. Talking to Brian Bellows, Kent Herbeck, Patrick Royce, all sorts of fun guests to help us remember that time. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Hope you guys enjoyed today's episode as well. We'll see you on Monday for that special episode, and we'll be back a week from Monday with regularly scheduled daily delivery podcasts. But we'll have 5 next week, just a little bit of a different format with the look back at 1991.